In 2020, Tiffany Booth took on a roommate who soon became a boyfriend. But when she didn't return from a weekend away and the boyfriend was nowhere to be found, Tiffany's family started seeking answers alongside the police. And now they're seeking justice. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Crimelines. I know last week I mentioned we would be talking about a controversial case with virtually no forensic evidence and kind of do our own personal compare and contrast with last week's forensic-heavy case. But I've bumped that circumstantial case to next week to get this episode out instead. This case is more urgent because justice has not been served, and the police need leads and tips to get this case moving forward towards trial. So I wanted to cover it as soon as I was able to. Haley from Haley Great Research told me about this case, and she did the bulk of the research for this episode. She has become a bit of an advocate for this case herself, trying to get more podcasts to cover it. In addition to her usual media research skills, she did speak with the family of the victim. So I want to send a huge thank you to Tiffany Booth's cousin Angelina and her aunt Mindy for speaking to Haley. Whenever families do interviews on cases like these, there is a level of re-traumatization. Sometimes talking can be cathartic, getting to process through things, or just that feeling that you know you're doing something to advocate for your loved one's case. But even when it feels like an overall positive experience, it is still putting yourself out there in a very vulnerable way and revisiting the worst time in your life. So I appreciate every family member and friend of a victim who is able to do interviews. And thanks to Haley having done that interview work and providing it to podcasters like me to get the word out on the case, the family doesn't have to go through these interviews again and again and again saying the same thing. Some formats do require unique interviews, but mine doesn't, so I definitely have more leeway here to not put the family in that position, and a special thank you goes to them and to Haley for that. We're going to start with Tiffany Lynn Booth, who was born on June 11th, 1985. She grew up in a small town in Oregon called Arlington and graduated from high school there in 2003, and she later moved to San Antonio, Texas. Tiffany was someone that everyone loved, being a caretaker at heart and also happy-go-lucky. She had a strong personality, and if anyone needed advocating for, she would be the one to do it. The combination of her being a caretaker personality and the person who will stand up for anyone meant she rooted for the underdog. And that did have a downside. Tiffany could see the good in pretty much everyone, but sometimes she had a hard time seeing those red flags. But there really are more upsides than downsides to Tiffany's personality, and another upside was that her caretaker heart made her the linchpin of the family. She was the one who kept everyone in touch. She had a special relationship in particular with her Aunt Mindy since they were only 8 years apart, and Tiffany really had close relationships with many extended family members because she was very interested in all of the family connections, planning family gatherings, reunions, and doing genealogy. Family was just incredibly important to her. When Tiffany was an adult, she even found her long-lost cousin Angelina. What had happened was something that sadly happens in so many families. When Angelina was younger, her father died, and she lost all connection to his side of the family. That included Tiffany until they connected online when Angelina was 25. Tiffany and Angelina learned that they had a lot in common, more than just being related, and so they became fast friends and made up for lost time quickly. Tiffany then served as a door for Angelina to get in touch with the rest of her father's family, and then Tiffany went a step further. She helped Angelina find her half-brother that she had never met, and Tiffany arranged for them to meet in person. All of this was done just out of love for her family. And love for family is how Tiffany landed in Vegas. Tiffany was living in Texas at the time, and her mother, Judy, who lived in Las Vegas, had MS. In about mid-2019, it had progressed to the point where she needed some extra help. Tiffany and Judy were very close, talking every single day, so it made sense for Tiffany to move in with her. By the fall of 2019, Tiffany, who was then 34 years old, had packed up her life in Texas and relocated to Las Vegas, moving into the extra room in her mom's condo. She then got a job in IT at a telecommunications company, though she was hoping to make a career change in the future. Tiffany's real dream was to work with children, which was something she not just loved, but she was a natural at. Her cousin Angelina has an instance that really highlights this, and you've probably heard this story if you know anything about this case because it is commonly reported on. Angelina's son occasionally needed to do breathing treatments, which anyone who has had to do those with a small child knows just how hard it can be on them. Due to his autism, it was even more difficult to communicate with him about the importance of the breathing treatment, but also the sensory experience of wearing the mask was just too much. Tiffany happened to have severe asthma herself, so she took photos of herself with the nebulizer mask on to send to him with a message, something like, "Sometimes grown-ups have to do this too." She wanted to normalize it for him while also showing him it's not that scary. I think the reason Angelina tells this story so much is because it really shows how Tiffany's mind worked. She heard about this issue Angelina was having with her son, and her mind went right to, what can I do to help this situation? Exactly what Tiffany's career with children would look like hadn't quite been hammered out when the pandemic hit, and pretty much everything got put on pause. In March of 2020, as things were locking down, Judy tested positive for COVID. With all the unknowns we had about the virus back then, you can understand why they immediately got worried for Tiffany, seeing as she had asthma. Other respiratory infections are risky for people with asthma as severe as Tiffany's, so there was reason to believe COVID would be as well. Tiffany didn't really have anywhere to go to isolate herself from Judy. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend, and she was new enough to the area that most of her friends lived out of state. But Judy did have a boyfriend who she could go stay with, so she moved in with him, and they formed their own little pandemic bubble. Not long after Judy moved to her boyfriend's place and it was decided she was going to stay there for a while, Tiffany's coworker, Eduardo Clemente, was venting to Tiffany that he was having major issues with his living situation. He was, according to him, staying with family, and his sister had attempted to kill him. He desperately needed a safe place to stay, even if that meant just crashing on someone's couch, because he just could not live with his sister anymore. As the conversation progressed, he brought up the idea that he could stay with Tiffany temporarily until he got things sorted out. Worried for her coworker and friend, Tiffany welcomed Eduardo into the condo in May. She really was that type. She certainly wouldn't leave someone to live in an abusive situation when she had an extra room just sitting there. Because Tiffany's mother, Judy, decided to keep staying with her boyfriend even after she recovered from COVID, there wasn't really a deadline that Eduardo needed to be out of the condo by. Tiffany told her family that she had moved in a roommate, but she neglected to mention that the roommate was a man. And the situation really was just roommates at first. It was around July of 2020, so probably 6 to 8 weeks after he moved in, that Tiffany and Eduardo started becoming romantically involved. Though Tiffany did not immediately tell her family about the change in this relationship. Her cousin Angelina thinks Tiffany hesitated to be forthcoming due to the circumstances. Having a male roommate would raise some eyebrows, but when they started dating, that meant they were already living together at the very beginning of their relationship, so it would seem like things were just moving very quickly. Sometimes we want to avoid judgments we anticipate coming in, so we just kind of put things on a need-to-know basis, and that's what this feels like to me. It took a couple of months for Tiffany to start telling people she was dating Eduardo, though some people had already guessed at the news. She confided in Angelina in September that she was in love with Eduardo and called him a big teddy bear. From everything Angelina heard, it really sounded like Eduardo was sweet and caring. In a group family text with her Aunt Mindy and Angelina in mid-September, Tiffany said they were not engaged, but they were headed in that direction, even talking about how they would have a Star Wars-themed wedding. Mindy and Angelina were happy for Tiffany, but they had some reservations. This was moving fast, and no one had actually met Eduardo yet due to lockdowns. But Tiffany wasn't 18 or 19 here. She was 35 and had life experience and relationship experience. Things in her life were moving in a positive direction, and from what they could see on social media, she was happy, healthy, and she had recently bought a new car. Tiffany and Judy, though they were living apart, talked on the phone every day and texted all throughout the day, but she had still hesitated for some reason to tell her mom about Eduardo, even after she told the others. It wasn't until September 27th, 2020, that Tiffany brought him to dinner with Judy and told her they were dating. She was the first family member to meet Eduardo, even though the others knew he was around longer than that. Judy thought he seemed very nice and he was really smart. She could tell that as they chatted, but he did seem pretty private. He hadn't given away much about himself in their conversation, aside from the fact that he's not very close with his family, but nothing that struck Judy as unusual in the moment. A few days after this dinner, on Thursday, October 1st, Tiffany texted Judy and said that her asthma was acting up because of a neighbor's marijuana smoke coming through a vent. She was letting her mom know that she and Eduardo were going to head out of town to Boulder City for the night, which is about a half an hour from Las Vegas near the Hoover Dam. Tiffany said she had already called her job and let them know she wouldn't be in on Friday, so she wasn't expected at work until Monday. Through text, Tiffany and Judy made plans to have dinner on Sunday night. Judy proceeded to call and text Tiffany after this, as it was their habit to talk several times a day. She didn't get any texts back and just got the voicemail when she called. She even messaged Tiffany on Facebook, and though it showed she was online or had been online recently, Tiffany didn't respond or comment on anything. Judy was a little concerned that she hadn't heard from Tiffany all day, so she remotely checked their condo's security cameras that are pointed at the parking spots, and she saw that Tiffany's spot was empty, which it would have been if she went out of town. So over the next 2 days, Friday and Saturday, Judy reached out to other family members just to see if anyone had heard from Tiffany, but no one had. At this point, they were not quite as concerned as Judy was. Judy had expected Tiffany to be back home on Friday since she said she was just going overnight, but others in the family could see why she might have extended her time away. Tiffany was in love, she was away with her boyfriend, and maybe they just wanted more quiet time alone. They even had the thought, what if they eloped and would just show back up after the weekend to announce that they were married? On Saturday, people started getting texts from Tiffany, but rather than bringing relief, they were actually what made everyone worried. The texts were not written the way she normally typed, and no one could get her on the phone to actually hear her voice. So while I say the texts were from Tiffany, I should just say that they were from her phone. Her family did not think they were from her, and they reached out to some of Tiffany's friends to see if they knew anything. Tiffany had a very tight group of friends back in San Antonio, so Tiffany's Aunt Mindy got in touch with them, and they said they had heard from Tiffany within their group chat on Saturday, and they also thought things were a little off. In this group chat, the participants had their locations turned on. So the friends noticed that Tiffany was messaging them from Idaho. This was odd since they didn't know that she was going to Idaho, and normally she would tell people if she was going on a trip, like we all do. And now that they were comparing notes with her family, they realized that Idaho was not where she told her mother she was going. Her mother thought she was 30 minutes away, whereas her phone was nearly 8 hours away. Someone in the group chat noticed the location and sent a message asking Tiffany what she was doing in Idaho. Tiffany, or the person using her phone, replied that she had to get away from Vegas because her dad was coming into town and he was stressing her out. This explanation sounded plausible enough to her friends who knew Tiffany historically had a complicated relationship with her dad. Her family, though, knew things between Tiffany and her dad were actually pretty good at that point, and so they didn't know why she would have wanted to avoid him. The last text from Tiffany's phone came on Saturday, October 3rd, around 8 at night. The last time the phone registered its location was on Sunday, October 4th, and it was in Idaho. The phone then went offline. Between the fact that the texts didn't sound like Tiffany, and Tiffany hadn't told anyone ahead of time she was going to Idaho, her family knew something was wrong, but they weren't sure what. Judy checked the footage from the condo's cameras again and saw that Tiffany's car still wasn't there. But when she tried to watch the previous videos from the week before, she found that the footage from September 29th and 30th had been deleted. This was not an automatic override since all of this information should have still been stored. Someone would have had to go into the app and manually choose to delete the video. On Sunday, the same day her phone was powered down, Tiffany missed dinner with her mother, and the last hope was that she would show up to work on Monday the 5th, which she did not, and neither did Eduardo. Judy texted Tiffany to ask if Fuzzy Kitty, who was her cat, needed any food or water since she was clearly gone longer than planned. Tiffany did not respond, so Judy and her boyfriend went out to the condo. They let themselves in and found that the cat had no food or water, and Tiffany's belongings were all there. The only thing that Judy noticed was missing was a blanket and Tiffany's cell phone. Her clothing, luggage, laptop, medications, inhaler, and so on were all left behind. Tiffany supposedly went out of town because her asthma was being triggered by the neighbor smoking, yet she didn't take her inhaler. And basically anything else she would have taken with her for a weekend away was still there. Judy went to the police and reported both Tiffany and Eduardo missing, though the family had the impression the police initially saw this as two adults who went away for the weekend and were late getting home. They would show up when they showed up. It wasn't until the next day that the police sent anyone out to the condo to even look around. For some context here, this is Las Vegas, and unfortunately, they get a lot of missing persons reports. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police oversees all of Clark County, so they have a total population they're serving of 2.2 million. One detective told In Pursuit with John Walsh that they get 500 missing persons reports a month. To put that number into perspective, New York City has about 1,000 missing persons reports per month, double what the Las Vegas Metro Police take. However, they have 4 times the population, and NYPD has 36,000 officers, whereas LVMPD only has 2,900. So it seems like LVMPD sees an unusually large number of reports per capita, and they have fewer officers to deal with the cases they do take in. Anecdotally speaking, one of the most shocking handlings of a missing persons case I have come across happened in Las Vegas. Chris Turner went missing in 2016, and the police closed his case because someone told the police that they saw him. The truth was, at that moment, Chris was actually a John Doe in their morgue, and it took 2 years to connect his case to his body. It was only connected after the family insisted on submitting their DNA to the department. Now, I do want to be clear that his body had already been found at the time this person said they saw him, meaning he could not have been alive. Chris's family has identified the person who told the police they saw him alive as a person of interest in what happened to him. Based on his mother's posts on social media, it doesn't seem like there is much of an ongoing investigation in the case, even though there are signs that Chris Turner was murdered. So to bring it back to the case we're discussing today, Chris Turner's mother had trouble getting the case in the media without the police involvement, and that seems to have been an issue for Tiffany and Eduardo's disappearances as well. Tiffany's family was trying to get coverage, but it would take a few days before the police really started taking this case more seriously. So the family had to start doing things themselves, like setting up a Facebook page to get information out there and to ask for leads. They were also monitoring Tiffany's social media since she was a regular user of Facebook, and while she was not responding to messages, they would see where it said she was active 1 hour ago. So it did give them hope that she was just taking space. But if she was checking her social media, she would have known how worried everyone was, and it was not like Tiffany to let people just sit there and worry. I do want to be clear that at this point, the family did believe that Tiffany and Eduardo were both missing people and did not immediately suspect one had done something to the other. On October 6th, Tiffany's family noticed her Facebook page disappeared. Someone deactivated it, but it's my understanding it was reactivated at some point. The day the Facebook page went offline was the same day that the police dispatched officers to Tiffany's apartment in response to the missing persons report from the day before. They found nothing out of place, and in speaking with Tiffany and Eduardo's workplace, they learned that Tiffany had texted her supervisor on October 1st to let him know that she wouldn't be in the next day. But Eduardo called on Friday, October 2nd, and left a voicemail saying that he and Tiffany were taking the day off. So this kind of changed the timeline a bit. Previously, the family believed that no one had heard from either of them since September 30th, other than through text, which can't be confirmed to be them. However, here we have Eduardo having been confirmed to be alive and well, making a phone call 2 days later on the 2nd. So we have one date for the last time anyone heard from Tiffany and a different date for the last time someone heard from Eduardo. 2 days after Tiffany and Eduardo were reported missing on October 7th, Tiffany's friend Bree showed up in town for what was a scheduled visit. She found out Tiffany was missing when she was trying to make more specific plans for her trip and decided to go anyway so that she could help the family search. Bree thought they might be able to get some information from Tiffany's bank to see when her accounts were last touched. So she found an old bank statement of Tiffany's so she could get all the account numbers she needed, and then she got Tiffany's social security number from her mom. With this information, she was able to call the bank and got exactly what she was looking for. Tiffany's card was last used on October 6th to buy gas and fast food in Idaho. The amounts for the food purchases were low, like $10, which was alarming because that's how much it would cost for one person to eat, not two. Things were just not adding up at this point for this to be a case of Eduardo and Tiffany being missing. It looked like one of them was alive and eating fast food. This spurred Tiffany's family to look deeper into who Eduardo was. The first thing they found was that he had dozens of social media accounts and used various aliases. Several of the social media accounts were under the name Daniel Trent, though they knew it was Eduardo due to his pictures. Tiffany's Aunt Mindy and her mother Judy went back to Tiffany's condo and decided they were past the point of privacy. They needed to figure out who Eduardo was and where he may have gone. They did not get answers to those questions, but they did find, tangled up in some stuff on Tiffany's bed, a fake ID with Eduardo's picture. They also found a black box on the table with the items you would use to make such IDs, which was their first sign that they were dealing with someone who knew what he was doing as far as flying under the radar went. Like I said, the police did not immediately jump on this case, and the early days of the investigation was mostly work being done by the family and friends of Tiffany Booth. That changed on October 8th when 2 off-duty officers found an abandoned car. They were hunting out in the remote mountainous area near Ely, Nevada, and they were 4 miles from the nearest road when they came across a silver Honda CR-V with the plates missing. So they checked the VIN on it, and it came back registered to Tiffany Booth. The area it was found was about 250 miles north of Las Vegas. 2 things changed with this discovery. 1, the family knew Tiffany would not willingly abandon the car she worked so hard to buy, so that meant something terrible had happened to her. And 2, this discovery made the police take this case much, much more seriously. The location of where the car was found would become relevant about a week or 2 later when Tiffany's cousin Angelina got a text from a friend who lived in the Ely area. It was a picture with the question, "Is this Eduardo?" And it was him. The friend then told Angelina what she knew. Eduardo had stopped in Preston, which is near Ely, and essentially camped on someone's property. They saw him there and asked what he was doing, and he said he was on a spiritual walk from Idaho to Henderson, Nevada, in the wake of his mother's death. He had 2 black backpacks with him, and he was pulling a red wagon. The neighbor then offered him a tent to use for the night. The next morning, she made him breakfast and ran his clothes through the wash. She also had a friend who was willing to drive him the 3.5 hours down to Henderson. I have to say, Preston seems to have the nicest people in the world. This man initially told them his name was Daniel, but then later said it was Eddie. While he was in Ely and on the drive to Henderson, they said he cried off and on. While they were incredibly kind to this man, they did think something was off, so they snapped a picture of him just in case. He was dropped off at a hospital in Henderson where he said a relative worked. And this was the last credible sighting of Eduardo Clemente. By the time this person mentioned the odd interaction with their neighbor, who then sent the tip to Angelina, Eduardo was no longer in the area as far as anyone could tell. This information was made public on October 25th, 2020 on the Find Tiffany Booth Facebook page. Tiffany was not with Eduardo, and as far as we know, he did not mention her. What the investigators did have, though, was Tiffany's car. The area where it was found was searched, and a few items were located that were relevant to the case, and one was a receipt from a Walmart in Twin Falls, Idaho, from October 3rd. What is Walmart known for here on Crimelines? Their excellent security cameras. They are extensive. And in checking the footage from the time and date on the receipt, investigators saw Eduardo buying camping and survival gear. And he was alone. Eduardo had previously bragged about how he could disappear from the world because he was able to live off the grid. So it seemed like he was making moves to do just that. With Tiffany out of contact, her car found abandoned, and her boyfriend showing up alone on CCTV, they had probable cause to apply for search warrants for both Tiffany's condo and her car. On October 10th, they executed the warrant on the condo. Though the family had gone in there a couple of times, they didn't clean or rearrange things, thankfully. In the second bedroom of the condo, they found a white powder on the carpet that looked like a powder carpet cleaner. They also found, strangely enough, a roll of saran wrap in there. This was a full forensic search, so they did a close inspection of things like the walls, the baseboards, and the door frames. And on the door frame in that spare bedroom, they found fine mist blood spatter with telltale bubbles. This was expirated spatter, meaning there was an injury like to the mouth or an internal injury where the blood mixed with air from the lungs and was breathed out. Someone had definitely been hurt in that room. We have an attempt to clean the carpet. We have fine mist blood spatter that the attacker had missed in his cleanup, and a random roll of saran wrap, which the investigators theorized was used to wrap up wounds to stop additional blood evidence from getting on the carpet or possibly even on the killer's clothes. So this double missing persons case was now being treated as a probable single homicide with the perpetrator on the run. After the search of the condo, they sealed it up with crime scene tape and left. They did not post a guard outside of the condo for the night, which they probably didn't see a need to. But at some point after the search, someone broke in through the patio. It's believed it was Eduardo, seeing as this person grabbed his stuff. Eduardo may have known when to strike because he had accidentally been kept up to date with the investigation, or at least how much the family had been told about the investigation. They had a family group chat, and it didn't occur to anyone in the family for days that the group chat included Eduardo. I mean, at first they thought he was a missing person alongside Tiffany, and when they realized that wasn't what happened here, no one was really thinking about who was or was not in these messages. And when they realized that they may have been giving Eduardo information if he was still using his phone, they immediately stopped using that chat and started a new one. The investigators were holding back quite a bit from the family at this point, as they usually do in open investigations, so it's not like he had an inside look at everything the police knew. Mostly, he just found out things a few days before the public. On October 11th, the day after the search of the condo, the investigators searched Tiffany's car. In this search, they found a GPS tracker attached to the car in a covert location. This raised a flag because when the police had checked Eduardo's bank statements, they saw that he bought the same type of GPS tracker back in September. It's believed he bought it and put it in Tiffany's car to keep track of her movements, and he simply forgot that it was there when he, allegedly, dumped her car. Putting a tracker on the car told the family that this man had controlling and possibly jealous behaviors, something that would later be confirmed by one of Tiffany and Eduardo's coworkers. This coworker hadn't come forward to the police for a few weeks, but he told them that Tiffany had confided in him that Eduardo was mentally abusive. He would make her feel worthless and he called her names. She said he even shoved her a few times during arguments. This conversation would have happened in September, and they had only been officially together for a few months at that point. The happy life Tiffany and Eduardo put out to the world was not the whole story. This same coworker told the police that his phone rang very early in the morning on September 30th, and according to the caller ID, it was Eduardo. When he answered, he realized that Eduardo must not have meant to call him because he was just yelling at someone that he, quote, wanted the truth. And then the call cut off. Tiffany's family believes that the fight had to do with one of Tiffany's ex-boyfriends who had recently texted her, and this was about Eduardo getting jealous. So the idea that Eduardo would put a tracker on her car to see where she was going made sense within this context. Leaving that tracker behind gave the investigators very important information when they pulled the GPS data. They found that the car traveled 45 minutes north from the condo to a desert area outside of Indian Springs. The car was then in that area for a while before leaving again. Though I can't find a specific date or time reported, it was either very late on September 30th or early on October 1st. This area where the car stopped used to be a landfill, but was at the time private property, though people in the area would still sometimes dump things there. And Eduardo had at one time lived in that area. The data on the GPS tracker gave a rather exact area to search, which they conducted on October 19th. Following the directions from the GPS, the authorities were led straight to a rocky ravine. And at the bottom was Tiffany's body, wrapped in a blanket and some plastic. The investigators informed the family that a body was found, but it was not in a condition where they could identify it as Tiffany immediately. They needed to get her dental records for comparison. But when they showed her mother a picture of the blanket she was wrapped in, she knew that was the same blanket missing from Tiffany's apartment. On autopsy, they discovered that Tiffany had died of blunt force injuries to the head. Tiffany's family just really could not understand how a kind, generous, and accepting person could come to such a violent end. But that's the exact type of person someone like Eduardo Clemente would take advantage of. Tiffany could see the good in everyone, which meant she often missed the bad. And then, after everything Tiffany had done for Eduardo, not only did he kill her, but afterwards he dumped her body in a place where people throw away trash. It was dehumanizing. A theory of the crime was then developed. The investigators believe that Eduardo and Tiffany got into an argument on the evening of September 29th, going into the morning of the 30th. Or possibly it started on the 30th in the very early morning hours. Eduardo turned physically violent, beating Tiffany to death. He then attempted to clean up the room and moved her body to her car, deleting the security footage afterwards. He then drove her body in her car to Indian Springs, where he left her in the ravine. On October 1st, Eduardo used Tiffany's phone to contact family and friends to delay them in reporting her missing. After he had left her body in the ravine, he continued on to Idaho while he figured out what to do. He eventually returned to Nevada, dumping her car and then getting a ride to Henderson. Eduardo Clemente was officially named a suspect in Tiffany's murder on October 28th. An arrest warrant was issued for her murder, vehicle theft for taking her car, and then several felony counts of using a bank card without a cardholder's consent for all of that fast food he just couldn't resist. In June of 2022, the family held a celebration of life for Tiffany that was publicized on social media, and the public was welcome to attend. The day before the memorial, her Facebook account was permanently deleted. The family believes Eduardo did it, and the only reason to delete the account at that point, after the investigators had already pulled all the data from it, would be just to prevent the family from accessing photos and memories on her page for the memorial. Before her Facebook page was deleted, a poster on Web Sleuths saw a post Tiffany made on a public neighborhood page. It was at 11:15 in the morning on September 29th, and it read, quote, "My boyfriend noticed someone on the roof of a nearby condo building. The guy dropped what looked like an electrical box and it made a big boom. Anyone know if there's any construction going on the roofs?" End quote. At first, I thought this would be the sort of thing Eduardo might post to explain away any noise heard when Tiffany was killed, but this was posted before it's believed Tiffany was killed. So I'm going to speculate a bit here. I'm not presenting this as fact. But let's say this was Tiffany posting. She mentioned her boyfriend witnessed this, not her. It makes me question if Tiffany really was killed during a spontaneous argument or if her murder was planned. Because it seems possible to me that Eduardo was planting the seed that there was some other person creeping around the roof of the apartment around the time Tiffany would eventually disappear. Or maybe he was trying to give a reason there might be a sudden loud sound in the complex. Now, these are just theories, and they're the sort of theories that need to be tested in court, which is the goal of getting this case in the media. because here we are 3 years later and Eduardo Clemente is still on the run. After getting dropped off in Henderson, it appears he went off the grid. A press conference was held on November 19th, 2020, and they gave information on where they believed he could be, which was basically any remote area in the Ely area and possibly even Idaho. Eduardo did not have a vehicle as far as we know, so I personally think people driving these rural highways in the West should keep an eye out for him as a hitchhiker. This is a case where bulletin boards with this picture in more remote areas might do better than putting them up in cities. Eduardo could be living rough, or he could be breaking into unoccupied cabins for shelter. So if someone notices a tent on their private property, or they go to their summer cabin to find that someone had been there over the winter, I would personally suggest that they call it in, even if it doesn't look like the person did any damage. Now that said, we do know that Eduardo doesn't always live off his own wits. He has sought refuge with churches and locals, and he will stay in hotels. The family told Haley about a time when he had possession of Tiffany's Nintendo Switch, which he may still have, and he used a food ordering app on the device to have food delivered to him at a hotel. Eduardo does have a background in IT, so I'm not sure how many slip-ups like this, like leaving behind the GPS unit and using the Nintendo Switch, he's going to make. He has probably thought of all the ways to cover his tracks, digitally speaking, but the hope is he will still make just that one mistake that leads to his location. Eventually, he's going to leave the one breadcrumb that lands the FBI at his door. Eduardo is unlikely to be using that name, but rather Edward, Eddie, or his favorite alias, Daniel Trent, or one we don't even know about. He is tall, about 6 feet 2 inches, and at his heaviest, he weighed 375 pounds. However, he had lost a lot of weight leading up to the murder, and then living rough and on the run, and possibly mostly off of charity, he probably lost even more weight. That would make him harder to recognize depending on the picture, so when I post this on social media and the website, I'm going to include different photos of him at different weights. This is a guy who looks pretty different depending on the photo, so the more we get out there, the better chances we have of finding him. Again, he is 6'2", probably about 200 pounds at this point. He has brown hair and green eyes. The investigators told In Pursuit that they believe Eduardo is in the western United States because that is where he has the most connections. Like I said, they don't think he's living entirely without help. He could be anywhere, but they're focused on Nevada, Idaho, and Montana. Tiffany's family believes that capturing Eduardo Clemente will not just get justice for Tiffany, but it will protect other women from this violent man. If you see Eduardo, though, do not approach him. He is believed to be dangerous and will do anything to stay free. Instead, snap a picture if it's safe to do so and call 911. You can also help by sharing Eduardo's wanted poster on social media. As helpful as physical bulletin boards are, virtual ones can reach millions of people. We want everyone to know what this guy looks like. You can also donate to a GoFundMe that funds the family efforts to keep Eduardo's face out there. And if you know anything on this case about Eduardo Clemente, aka Daniel Trent, or where he's been in the last 3 years, you can call Crime Stoppers anonymously at 702-385-5555 or report a tip online at crimestoppersofnv.com. There are 2 rewards offered currently, totaling $20,000. Links to all the phone numbers and websites will be in the show notes. Check out my social media for wanted posters and more information you can share. There will be a timeline on the website, and let's go ahead and get this guy caught. Thank you for listening. If you want more content, check out my other show, Crimelines and Consequences, wherever you get your podcasts. I also offer bonus content and ad-free listening at patreon.com/crimelines or through the Apple Podcast app. If you want to buy me a coffee, the official drink of Crimelines, you can give a one-time donation at basement4productions.com/support.